So, I guess it's time for me to give a little talk. Ben has been giving really great talks lately, and we have got them uploaded on YouTube if you haven't been around for any of them, looking deeply at some of the factors of enlightenment and some of the some real deep Buddhist wisdom. And I'm sure thankful, as I know many of you are, for the opportunity to really dive into this Buddhist study. This group has proven to me to be really about as in-depth a group as I have ever seen. I've been doing this about 15 years. I've studied with a lot of different folks over the years. And this depth of understanding of the practice and Dhamma is really, truly unique. And so I've been super thankful for this opportunity. And so the first thing I want to do is just send out thankful thoughts to my teachers before I start talking. Fra Tita Domo and Ben and LP Chali and everybody involved in this group has been really important to me and helped my wisdom. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the opportunity to get to talk, to get to see you folks here on Saturdays and share anything that I might be able to share. And I'll say absolutely deeply from the bottom of my heart, I'm only hopeful that anything that I have to share betters your practice and helps make your life better. That is the only reason I have anything to say. I don't have anything to offer you that is a unique wisdom that is solely my own. I only offer what I've seen from my own practice and know to be true. And I only offer things that I feel could be helpful to people. And absolutely, I always also say, please correct me if you see something where you think that I'm errant. And I invite you all to do that. But today I want to dive into, since Ben has been doing such a spectacular job with his talks looking at these subjects, I want to dive into kind of where I left off in my last talk. Was I had talked about the Dhammachakra Sutta and how we set the wheel in motion, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and that finishes with the fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path, which I did not elaborate on when I was talking, and is truthfully the cornerstone of all Buddhist practice, is the Eightfold Path. And boy, does Buddhism become a thing by the numbers. You got all these different numbers around. You got the Four Noble Truths, you got the 6 factors of this and the 8 truths of that. And it all can get really kind of confusing, but keeping in mind the idea at the beginning was this is an oral tradition, and we have to find a way when we figure out something works to pass those instructions along. And that is what the Buddha came up with in the Eightfold Path. When he comes and delivers the Four Noble Truths and he says, I've seen this really clearly, and suffering is the true human problem that applies to everyone. The hankering and want that you have drives that suffering, but that suffering can end and you can live your life without it. That's the third noble truth. And then finally, the Eightfold Path. These are my recommended steps for making this true in your life. And boy, the Eightfold Path is a tricky subject. And in fact, there's no way in 15-20 minutes I could give you a full view of the Eightfold Path, because in truth, Buddhism is the process of the Eightfold Path. That's really what it is. When you look at the term path that we use, that can be a good and bad translation. You wouldn't, for example, find some other use of the term path, like a hiker, goes down the path to get to the mountain. We don't call them a stand at the top of the mountain person. We call them a hiker, because hiking is what you're doing, not the single moment of standing at the top of the mountain. And the only other real good use of path in this term is the idea as if you had driven your car way out in the mountains with the hope to do a hike, and you park at the end of the trail, at the top of the trailhead, and you see Ben loading his mountain bike onto his car. And you're like, clearly that is a person who has been on the path. He is exhausted and happy and has clearly seen the top of the mountain. And you say, Ben, can you show me the path? And Ben would say, it's over there. He wouldn't say, let me walk you through every step of this. Let's talk about each and every section of the path, because it's not how it unfolds. It unfolds for you taking one step at a time. So it becomes a complicated thing to say, this is the Eightfold Path. Moreover, the Eightfold Path is made up of a series of concepts that we begin with the term right view and right understanding. And while I'm going to share with you all of those things in a moment, I would say there's a term that's really precarious too, particularly today, to say that the steps in this path, as if they are one thing that leads after another, are right, as in correct. Because we live in a culture, particularly here in the West, I think, where you subscribe, you figure out what's right. Oh, well, this is the correct political view, and this is the correct political view. And maybe I've checked all of my facts for my understanding and concepts, and so my political view is clearly the correct one. And so when we use a term like right understanding, that would suggest, or right view, that would suggest that my view is correct, and ergo yours may be wrong, and that isn't a very good translation, I don't think, of what the steps of the Eightfold Path are about. It becomes kind of as if there's, when you hear Eightfold Path, as if there's some kind of super secret recipe. And if you take these 8 ingredients and you put them all together, then poof, a magical potion will happen and you'll be magically liberated and you won't ever suffer again. And that's not precisely accurate, because of course you can't just put these things together and have it just suddenly end that. But the experience of walking on the path is kind of like that experience. It's like, as I incorporate these things in my life, I notice that my suffering abates. Like, not any more complicated than that. Like, it's not like you're going along and then one day you meditate extra hard, and then that meditation's the one that unlocks everything, and then from then on out you just never get upset about anything. That's not how it works. Just like I'm not a person who's just standing at the top of the mountain. So it becomes a little tricky to talk about the Eightfold Path in that way, to say these are steps in a path. I think a better way to relate to it maybe would be to use the word code. Like, this is a code that I use for my life, a philosophical code. If you think about other uses of that term, for example, code of the samurai leaps to mind. Samurai warriors had a very specific set of rules that they used to govern all the things in their life. Those rules were really clear cut, and they stuck with those rules. You might also say, well, this is the law enforcement code in my community. I can't let my grass grow too high, because if I do, then I'm going to get a ticket. Why, there's even a code there. But as you look at those things, there's a code of a hiker. There's a code of, make sure that you hydrate, make sure that you take your right supplies, make sure that you do these things if you're going to go on the trail, because we tie the food up in the tree because we don't like being eaten by bears. So there is a code for hikers. And so that maybe is a better way to relate to it, because the truth is, this is a Dhamma. This is an understanding of a way to live your life. For the Buddha, the term Dhamma was something he related to in the traditional Hindu concept. I'm looking for a set of rules for my life that's going to create the best life. And so the Dhamma that the Buddha presented, Buddha Dhamma, is a code of a way to live your life that can decrease or make your suffering abate. That's it. That's what he offered. For him, he wasn't a samurai, so he didn't use a samurai code. He wasn't a warrior. Warrior code, we even have soldiers here in our culture who live their life by a warrior code. Semper Fidelis, right? Semper Fi, I'm a Marine, right? That is a warrior's code. It's what a warrior might choose to live his life by. And if you felt like you really needed to go to war, like that was going to be the thing, like you had to go fight the bad guy, and be a soldier, then you might want to live your life by that code. But if instead what you see is, I am a person who recognizes that suffering is a root of all human existence, that there is a path out of that suffering, and that I can decrease my hankering and want, maybe that's the code I want to live my life by. Maybe that's what I want to do. I want to live my life by the code of not suffering. And that's what the Buddha offers with the Eightfold Path. So as I present it here, and I'm going to move to a brief introduction to the Eightfold Path itself, show you a nice graphic and talk about that. I would say that this is not something that is engaged in a way. Keep in mind, it's not a recipe. And keep in mind, I have nothing to sell you. There's nothing here where it's like, well, our super secret sauce works better than anybody else's. You got to do this. Not at all. It's presented as a path, just like I said, the guy unloading his mountain bike. And you say, where is the path? And he says, that way. But it doesn't mean that you're going to find mountain biking fulfilling, or that you're going to be able to figure that out. It just means that there is this thing for you to go discover on. My experience has been, I have discovered a lot by incorporating this in my life, but I never really understood it, not at all, especially not early on. Again, I'm looking for that recipe. We all do this. We all look around in our culture of wanting to have our view be right and say, this is correct and that's not correct. And I too was looking for a secret sauce when I started this process. So when I looked at the Eightfold Path, it's like, oh, okay, right livelihood. Well, then I should name my business Karmic Computers, and I should do these things, thinking that if I did that in my life, it would help it. And the answer is it did, but not in the way that I thought it would. It certainly was never a formula. It was not that. It's just more like after 10 years of doing this, I'm like, oh, I do feel more compassionate. I do have less stress in my life. I am living a really vibrant life thanks to this Eightfold Path. So that's something that you have to dive in for yourself. Again, this is something where as you deal with these, steps in the Eightfold Path, you have to reconcile for you what your causes and conditions that you brought to the party influence your understanding of that path. So rather than sit and give a long talk on each and every one of these subjects, I thought it would be better to introduce the concept that way from what I've seen experientially with this path, that it is a way of living my life, a code to live by that's made all the difference to me, made all sorts of benefit. And in the end, as you dive into this path, what I would do is, instead of saying, hey, let's examine each one of these topics one at a time in a long talk, is go look at each one of these things for yourself. And if you want to talk about it, give me a call and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about that specific thing and what you see and what you experience with it. What spoke of the Eightfold Path wheel are you on or are you working with right now? Because it is something that is you gotta go deal with. And if you also, I'm sure Ajahn Brian would feel the same way and Ben would feel the same way. Talk about this thing, work it out, and see what you see for you. So here is the Noble Eightfold Path, a nice graphic representation. The spokes of a wheel is how this is usually represented. Right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. There's a great story about Suzuki Roshi giving a talk on this subject at the University of Hawaii, where he came out and he said, the first step in Noble Eightfold Path is right view, or on this right understanding. And he said, all of Buddhism, fundamentally right view. And then he said, the second step, it's like, I don't know, I don't remember the second step. You look it up in the book, it's out there. And that was like the sum of his talk. And Suzuki Roshi, a great Buddhist, learned Buddhist master, but his point is accurate. It becomes really difficult when you start talking about this and you look at those spokes as if one turns after the other, because they don't. They're all happening. They're all a part of a whole process. So some of how this is split up is into these divisions, like the division of wisdom and the division of ethical contact and the division of mental discipline. And pretty straightforward in the idea that these are, if you think of these in terms of code, like these are a code of ethics. Like my code of wisdom is, I'm going to try to understand the nature of things, how they really are, and what's actually happening. And when I do that, I'm going to try to incorporate the right understanding of that in my life in a way, and in a way of implementing that in my life. Why I'm going to have ethical conduct. I'm going to use right speech. I'm going to make sure that my actions are right, and I'm going to make sure that my livelihood is right. Now, again, if we say right as in correct, it becomes a misunderstanding, I think, of what the Buddha was really after. This is not to say, well, my speech is right, and so your speech is wrong, and so everything I say is right and everything you say is wrong. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're saying here. What we are saying is that I'm going to try to incorporate in my life not saying things that are going to harm other people, that aren't helpful, might be hurtful. I'm going to go out of my way to not do that. I'm going to make that code part of what I'm doing in my life. Like, that's it. Like, that's all. I'm going to just not say nasty things. I'm going to make it a point. When I catch myself saying nasty things, I'm going to find a way to shift that. And why? Because if I am engaging in not right speech, then I clearly am not understanding correctly. My thoughts are not correct. I clearly have not seen the noble truths the way that I should if I'm sitting here saying something nasty that might cause suffering, because I clearly have not understood suffering. So you know what? When you're on the Eightfold Path, you're going to fail. You're going to get lost. You're going to say something nasty when you didn't mean it to somebody, and you're going to reconcile that by saying, yes, but I endeavor to be on the Eightfold Path, so I'm going to try to correct that. The Buddha talks again and again in the suttas about undertaking training. And the Eightfold Path is truly that. It's undertaking training. It's, if I'm stressed out and upset about something, then maybe my right understanding is off. Maybe my view is off. So if I have engaged in the Noble Eightfold Path and said, this is going to be the code by which I live my life, then I would have to look at that and say, if I'm suffering, then maybe I don't understand correctly. Maybe I need to look at this a little deeper. What is the thing that the Four Noble Truths tell me about that? And that's living my life by the Noble Eightfold Path. So the first division of wisdom is really kind of right understanding. It's really grasping the first three noble truths, the efficacy of the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and then looking at what those things say about our lives and looking at that directly. And in time, cultivating a better understanding as you grapple with what the Four Noble Truths tell you about that. The division of ethical conduct, like I said, is kind of living your life on the, straight and narrow. We take our precepts, like we talked about at the beginning. We take our precepts and we say, these are the ambitions that we have. We're not going to kill anything. We're not going to steal anything. We're not going to do drugs and alcohol. We're not going to misuse sex. We're not going to do those things. Why? Because we want to live our life in an ethical way, because my code of conduct is here to destroy my suffering. So I'm going to do these things because I'm going to, out of my ethical conduct, not screw up anything in the future that then is going to cause me suffering. So the Noble Eightfold Path, taken as separate individual steps, could be totally misguiding. It's not any better than the old mountaineer saying, yeah, it's over there. It's not going to help you trek that path. But if you grasp that it's a rough idea of a way through the wilderness, that it gets you directly to the peak of the mountain, you might want to make it part of your life. You might not want to just venture your way through the woods willy-nilly. You might want to try to take that path and make it the way that you find your way through that wilderness. The last division of mental discipline, I touch on that last because that is one of the deepest topics of raising right effort, raising your mindfulness, and living your life in a way that's full of discipline, that is what we primarily get here out of Vipassana. That is actually the largest thing that we talk about. We talk about how to raise our mindfulness and wisdom, seeing things how they actually are with our Vipassana. And so this is why sometimes I think this can be a little confusing, is because if you're seeing this as steps in a path, it's like, these are all the things that I have to climb to get to the top of the mountain. Or if you see these as ingredients in a secret formula, then it's all going to be completely overwhelming all the time and never make a lot of sense. But if you see this as a way to generate in your life a code of conduct that's going to help alleviate your suffering, then all of a sudden some of it makes a lot more sense. And one of those things that makes a lot more sense is why it's important to implement practice in your life, and that discipline of practice. Perhaps that's a better word. The discipline of wisdom, the discipline of ethical conduct, and the discipline of mental discipline. And in the end, those things make up the code that is what the Buddha taught in how to alleviate your suffering. So we look at a lot of numbers and we do a lot of things, and I've already talked longer than I had aimed to, so I'm going to wrap that up and open this up to questions. But I think that it's important to understand this is one of the most critical parts of Buddhism. This is the Buddhist life: walking the Eightfold Path, gaining a deep understanding, living your life ethically, and developing deep mental wisdom. With that, I will wrap it up and open up to questions. I'd invite all of you to unmute your microphones, and if you have any questions or corrections for me, please, by all means, let me know. But thank you for letting me talk about the Eightfold Path. It's a tricky little bit of business. We can dive any deeper into this anytime you wish. Just let me know.
Can I offer something? You know, yes, me, please. I'm always gonna pipe in. I too had difficulty with the word right, and I've had difficulty with many words as they've been presented, suffering and such, because they're translations. They're translations from another language, probably been translated through several languages, eventually getting to English, and then these are the words that have the probably the closest meaning to it. But for me, I had that, like I said, like you, I had difficulty with the word right. And so the word that I use is appropriate. I have found appropriate to be the word to work for me, because this is appropriate for me, the way I speak, and the way I meditate, and the other items on that Eightfold Path. It's
something like you gotta look at the translation. Like you say, you gotta see how it translates in your life. Right. And I agree. I think that's a good, at the Zen temple, a lot of times they use the phrase skilled. They, instead of right, they say skilled, like skilled livelihood, or skilled understanding. And I think that's important too, because it's a skill that we're developing. Mindfulness is a skill that we're developing as part of this training that we're undertaking to deplete our suffering. Yeah, I agree. Anybody else got any thoughts? Eightfold Path?
I was thinking that when I started working with Ben, I had like this stuff. It was messy stuff. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about this? And then Ben would say, just practice. Just practice. And I'm like, Ben, there's no way sitting is going to take care of this mess. And it did. And it was shocking. And I remember when some of the chaos in my head would start going away, I would be so prepared that, you get near your car and you drive and you pass the store, and the store's been there for 20 years. And every day you pass the store, and one day the store wasn't there. And I was like, oh my goodness, where'd the store go? It's just not there. That thought I always have isn't there. That resentment I always have. It's just, and I would check, and it's like I was looking under the couch, and I was looking in the refrigerator. Where did the resentment go? I can't find it. And he would say, just keep practicing. And so I don't know how to explain it except for the fact that it has worked. But my job is to actually stay on the path. I go to the temple on Thursdays, the one in Vancouver, and I talk to Ben regularly. He's there right there. And that's my job, is to keep showing up.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to keep walking. You know, if you've ever done any hiking or any serious walking like that, and once you get in the middle, it's like, what are you gonna do? Stand still and just wait? You know, you've got to either go. You've got to go or go back, one of the two. But you can't just stay still in the wilderness.
I would just like to offer just one last, to me, what I've come to understand about the Eightfold Path is, as it's presented, it's a wheel, and it's always turning, it's always moving. There is no, okay, I do step A or one, and then when I complete one, I take step two, I complete step two, I move to step three, so on and so forth. That's not how the Dhamma works. It's a Dhamma wheel. It's always in motion, and you are always in motion. So you're moving from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and you incorporate them all. Eventually, they all are being incorporated.
Yeah, and it just kind of comes together. It just, you know, you make it part of your life, and then pretty soon it's just like, oh yeah, this is just how we do it around here. You know, I mean, this is just what I do, and it's not that spectacular. It just is that there is less suffering. There's just, I mean, you just don't get as bent out of shape as you used to about the same things you used to get bent out of shape about. What can I say? That's about as best as I can relate it. It's like and it gets deeper. Clearly, then we can deal with deeper issues. Then we can look at death. We can look at death, and we can not be terrified. Why? Because we're not terrified about the electric bill. Because we're not bent out of shape about the thing that happened in the grocery line. So because we're not bent out of shape about those things, then that skill develops, that understanding develops, and it becomes easier to look at the deeper, bigger, broader issues. And I've been doing this for 15 years. I can't wait to see what another 15 years might yield. I mean, the depth of practice is so amazing, and the things you see are just again and again and again. It's like, oh my gosh. And at the same time, it's the practice. What I mean by that is that life becomes a little different place to exist than it was before. That's the only way, and that's why it's so hard to describe, and why you got to take the path for yourself. But you know, it's not this is not a follow us and you got to do everything exactly the same. Nope, you can trek through the wilderness if you want, full speed ahead, grab your machete and just try. Or you could take this path that all the mountain bikers say you'll stay alive and find the top of the mountain if you go that way. So, Ajahn, Brian, do you have anything to add, sir?
Not particularly. I think I was pondering a little bit the idea of right as well. That word causes a lot of trouble for people. I think sometimes it's good to look at why we're bothered by it, because there's an attachment there. The word itself from Pali, samma, like sammaditi, sammasankappa, all of these different aspects. This path leads to nibbana or it doesn't. So if we're doing it right, we're going to nibbana. If we're doing it wrong, then we lead ourselves to suffering. So I think sometimes in cases where we have a lot of struggle with the English words, it's best just maybe to stick to Pali. But a lot of the time when we feel ourselves having issue with the idea of the word right or any word, it's because we got attachment. So it's another thing we can look at for ourselves.
Well, that is awesome wisdom. Thank you for adding that. I just a little thing that I heard on that. I did hear samyak, that the root of that is the same as the root that we use for sum in, say, math or algebra. So a sum is what you get if you add everything up together. So total and complete was another kind of translation I heard, but I got to stick with the boss there. He's right. You're either doing this or you're not doing this. You know, it's like my mother used to say, you're either pregnant or you're not. You're either on the Eightfold Path or you're not. And in the end, if you aren't, you're going to see it. You're going to see suffering. You're going to see frustration. You know, you're going to see that. And you'll be like, well, and so that's why I think abiding in that compassion and wisdom is the critical thing. I've talked enough today. This was a long topic in the first place. I've talked enough. If anybody else has got any questions, you can stick around. But Ajahn Brian, would you be willing to lead us in metta to wrap things up?
Yes, of course. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their actions and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs.
Well, I don't see Hayden here, so who else can lead us in the paying respects to the triple gem? Brian, I suppose you're the most qualified person among us. Would you be willing to do that? Lead us in paying respects to the triple gem?
Sure. Arahang sama sambuddho bhagava Bhutang bhagavantang abhivademi Soakato bhagavata dhammo dhammang namasami Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho sanghang namami.
Thank you all for practicing with me. I hope you all stay safe and healthy and well. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody else wants to visit, but other than that, have yourself a great week, and we'll see you Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific or next Saturday at the same time and channel.